Hey folks, this is Bob from Bob's Garage. Today we're going to be installing struts on a 2005 Toyota Corolla S, and right now I've got the car jacked up and on jack stands with the wheels off. The reason we're replacing struts is because the boot is broken on the strut, and the car's got about 160,000 miles on it, so rather than just replacing the boot, the owner wants to replace the struts. So first things we're going to have to do is get the old struts out, and there's a couple of mounting bolts here down on the swing arm by the axle, or the A-arm, and there's also a bolt up here on the torsion bar that's going to have to come off. Runs down to the torsion bar, and then there's also brake line attached up here, so this bolt has to be removed. And then once all the lower things are removed, you also have to take the 3 bolts out of the shock tower, or the strut tower up on top, and the strut should come right out of there. And then later we'll get on to the disassembly of the strut and taking the spring out with spring compressors and so forth. The other thing you want to do is make sure you have your tools and the correct parts. So I have a new set of struts here, and they are actually labeled left and right. I don't know if you can see it that well. And I also have a new set of boots and the stoppers. So I guess anytime you're replacing struts, you should probably replace the boots. These are inexpensive items, and they come with a set of instructions. It's very easy, but the hard part is going to be compressing the springs. And I have a set of spring compressors over here ready to go, and these just clamp on the spring, and we'll show that later, but you can rent these at most of your local auto parts stores. Some you can get them for free. You just pay a deposit, and then when you return it, you get your deposit back. So we'll start with the removal of the strut. So I'm going to get all these bolts loosened up, and next photo will be getting the old strut out. Okay, at this point I've got the brake line loose. That was just one bolt, and then I also have the sway bar tie rod for the sway bar loose, and that was pretty easy to get off. For the lower bolts, you're going to need something a little bit more significant. It's a 19 millimeter bolt, and I have a long breaker bar, and these bolts are probably going to be a little bit difficult to get off, so you want to make sure you have a half inch drive socket. And breaker bar, actually it wasn't too bad. I was expecting worse, but you're going to need leverage to get these off, and 3/8 drive probably isn't going to do it. Okay, so they're coming loose. So at this point I've got everything on the lower side loose, and the next step is to get the strut tower bolts loose, and then the strut should actually come right out of there. So we'll get to that point. Okay, at this point the strut is down and it's out of the tower. You can see that the boot is pretty badly broken on this thing. The next step is we're going to have to put the spring compressors on the spring and make sure that it's secure, and then loosen up this bolt on top and then take the spring off. Okay, and you have to be very careful when you're doing that because there's a lot of tension on this spring, and if your spring compressors let go, you know, you could get injured or worse. So just make sure you're very careful when you're doing this operation, and I'll show how to secure the spring compressors in a moment. But you can see that the strut is out of the tower, and there's a little cap that goes on top of here, and it exposes the bolt, and you can see that there's grease on there. Okay, so we'll get to putting on the spring compressors. Okay, another thing I didn't show is you want to make sure you keep the orientation of this thing straight up and down with the mounting brackets. You know, you want to make sure that your top bolts remain lined up, and there is some rotation on this thing now that I put the spring compressor on it, but I just want to make sure that I maintain that position, because when you put this thing back up in the strut tower, you want to make sure that the three bolts line up, and that your lower part lines up with the mount on the A-arm. Okay, so what I'm going to do is mark all this stuff with a paint pen to keep that alignment. Okay, I've got the spring compressors on there, and one thing I had to do was hold the shaft securely with a vice grips while I was removing the bolt that was on this part. But I got everything off of there, and you can see the old stopper in there and the boot. The new boot looks a little bit different, so I may have a problem here. I don't know yet. I'm going to try to fit the boot up in there and see what happens. Okay, I've got the spring off and the new strut ready to go. Again, you want to make sure that you have the right side that you're replacing, and you know, you don't put the wrong side on the wrong one. And you can tell that again by the right and left, but you can also look at this and see where the tabs and the brake line up. I noticed a difference between the original boot and the new boot, and the difference is the original has this flange on there, and it acts kind of like a bumper or a gasket for the spring. The new one does not have that flange, but it looks like it will clamp on the bumper, so I'm going to have to spend a little time figuring this out and making sure that this thing will work, because the dust boot basically keeps all the dirt and grime out of the seal on the shaft for the strut. That's why it's very important to have that boot in there. Oh, and by the way, this gasket came off of the old strut, so you want to make sure you use that. So take that off your old strut or replace it, get a new one. Okay, I've got everything on here, and I read the instructions for the strut or the boot, and it looks like the what they want you to do is to put this piece in here and make sure the top of the flange goes inside and mates with that inside lip. So you just push that thing in there. It was kind of hard to get it in there. I used a screwdriver to push it in, and looks like it just goes on there like so, with the bumper at the top. And then I stacked my pieces on the top, and I actually have not put the nut back on the top yet, and I'm getting ready to do that. So I'll get that all tightened up, and basically I can remove the spring compressors and get it back up in there. Okay, just a word of caution. Before you remove the spring compressors, make sure that the top bolt is all the way tight, and then you can remove the spring compressors. The other thing that you want to look out for, there's some protruded areas up on the top. Sorry, I don't know if you can see that, but the starting point of the spring should go all the way around this area. This is what holds the spring on the top flange. And then the other thing I said earlier about keeping all of this in alignment, wrong. You don't have to worry about it. This whole thing rotates, so you can get those 3 bolts lined up in the strut tower without a problem. So now I'm gonna mount the strut back up in the strut tower. And I'm aligning the bolts on the top. Basically is where I'm starting. So I'll cut it off until I'm done.
Okay, so there it is. The new strut is mounted on the bottom, and the sway bar is connected, brake line connected. And one thing I should note, I had a little problem with the orientation of this part up on top, but it turns out that the big part with the 3 holes or 4 holes that you see up there faces towards the fender on the outside. It's kind of a circle that's not round, but that bigger part seems to grab on the one end of the spring. But anyway, it faces towards the outside of the car. And then you can see that the 3 bolts are secured up on top, as well as the center bolt on the strut. And just put your dust cover back on, and that's it. One done, one to go.